Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. The content presented in this documentary series is for educational, historical, and entertainment purposes only. It does not constitute legal, psychological, marital, or financial advice. The historical trends, case studies, and media phenomena analyzed in this video reflect sociological observations and academic research into media history and cultural shifts. Viewers should not make major life decisions based solely on this content, and are strongly encouraged to conduct their own due diligence and consult with licensed professionals regarding their personal relationships, legal status, or mental health. In the winter of 1935, millions of American women sat in darkened living rooms, their eyes fixed not on a screen, but on a glowing wooden box. They were listening to Oxydol's own Ma Perkins, a radio drama explicitly designed by corporate executives to sell laundry detergent. For 15 minutes every day, these listeners absorbed a carefully constructed narrative about family, endurance, and the absolute necessity of keeping a household together at all costs. Fast forward to the present day. Millions of Americans sit in modern living rooms, staring at glowing handheld screens, watching short-form videos that aggressively push what sociologists now call the divorce now narrative. These digital creators, backed by sophisticated algorithmic engines, tell viewers that the ultimate form of self-actualization is the immediate dissolution of their marriages and long-term partnerships at the very first sign of friction. What if the emotional volatility of your modern relationship, and the sudden cultural urge to walk away from it, is not an organic evolution of human freedom, but the calculated result of a century-long media engineering project? What if the corporate forces that once paid millions to keep American families together in the 1930s have realized that, in the 21st century, there is far more profit to be made in tearing them apart? We are currently living through an unprecedented shift in how human relationships are quantified, commodified, and broadcast. To truly understand why modern relationships feel so fragile, we must bridge the gap between two seemingly unrelated eras: the golden age of American radio drama and the contemporary attention economy. This deep dive masterclass is designed to solve a critical, agonizing problem that thousands of Americans face today: the profound sense of confusion and anxiety stemming from the constant media bombardment telling them that their relationships are inherently broken, toxic, or obsolete. By analyzing historical trends and evaluating specific media case studies, we will decode the hidden structural patterns that dictate your emotional decisions. You will discover how the narrative formulas invented by early radio pioneers to manipulate the American housewife have been inverted by modern tech platforms to manipulate you. This is not about relationship advice. This is about media literacy and understanding the historical pipeline that shapes our private lives. To map out this potential outcome, we have to look closely at the initial architecture of mass media. Before the 1920s, entertainment was localized, community-driven, and highly fragmented. The introduction of commercial radio changed human psychology forever by entering the domestic sphere. For the first time in history, corporations had direct, auditory access to the interior spaces of the American home. However, networks like NBC and CBS quickly ran into a major economic problem. How do you monetize the empty hours of the daytime broadcast schedule when the primary workforce is away at factories and offices? The answer lay in the demographic that remained at home: the American housewife. Corporate sponsors like Procter & Gamble, Colgate-Palmolive, and Lever Brothers realized that if they could capture the emotional attention of these women, they could control the purchasing habits of the American household. This realization gave birth to the soap opera, a narrative medium defined by its serialized, never-ending structure. Producers like Erna Phillips, widely considered the matriarch of the American radio drama, engineered a specific storytelling formula. The narratives focused heavily on domestic trials, interwoven family dynamics, and the supreme virtue of marital endurance. In case studies of early programs like Painted Dreams or The Guiding Light, characters faced immense suffering, infidelity, financial ruin, and societal pressure, yet the moral anchor of the show always returned to preservation. The structural functionalism of these early radio dramas served a dual purpose. On the surface, it provided escapism and validation for women performing isolated domestic labor. Beneath the surface, it reinforced social stability. A stable household with a predictable family structure was the most efficient consumer unit for mass-manufactured household goods. If a family stayed together, they bought a house, they bought a radio, they bought continuous supplies of soap, flour, and appliances. The media narrative of the 1930s and 1940s was, therefore, fundamentally aligned with the economic necessity of marital preservation. Now, consider the modern inversion. In the contemporary media landscape, the economic incentives have completely transformed. The transition from legacy broadcast networks to programmatic, algorithmic social media platforms has changed what is profitable. Today's media platforms do not monetize through the sale of mass-market domestic goods to stable household units. They monetize through user engagement, watch time, and micro-targeted behavioral advertising. The algorithms that govern modern content consumption are mathematically optimized to promote emotional volatility, outrage, and hyper-individualism, because these emotional states generate the highest click-through rates and prolonged screen time. This economic shift has directly birthed the divorce now narrative. On modern video sharing applications and digital forums, relationship conflict is no longer framed through the lens of endurance or collective problem-solving. Instead, it is treated as a highly bankable content genre. Case studies of viral relationship content reveal a repetitive, highly profitable formula. A creator details a standard marital disagreement. The comment section overwhelmingly diagnoses the spouse with severe psychological disorders like narcissism or sociopathy, and the collective consensus dictates that the user must immediately exit the relationship. The structural parallel between the 1930s soap opera and the 2020s algorithmic feed is striking. Both rely on microdoses of daily emotional stimulation to build parasocial dependencies. However, while Erna Phillips' radio scripts use serialization to keep audiences tuning in to see a family survive, modern creators use serialization to document the breakdown of a family. The collapse of a marriage offers weeks, sometimes months of highly engaging content updates, complete with legal battles, emotional breakdowns, and lifestyle transformations. Single individuals, statistically speaking, consume differently than established family units. They spend more on lifestyle apps, solo travel, individual housing, and self-care products. The modern attention economy has realized that a culture of hyper-independent, unattached individuals creates a far more volatile, and therefore more profitable, consumer base than a traditional stable household. By exploring this 10-part historical analysis, you will gain the critical tools required to look at your digital consumption through a totally objective lens. We will systematically dissect the evolution of American narrative design, showing you step by step how the corporate objectives of media conglomerates have historically dictated the boundaries of American morality and relationship expectations. You will learn to identify when a digital narrative is genuinely trying to help you, and when it is simply leveraging historical trends of emotional manipulation to keep you scrolling. Understanding this media history is the first step toward reclaiming your psychological sovereignty and protecting your real-world connections from the engineered chaos of the digital world. To fully comprehend the depth of this modern matrix, we must travel back to a specific inflection point in American history, long before the advent of fiber optic cables or touchscreens. Imagine an American household in the year 1936. A woman named Eleanor is standing in a kitchen in Ohio, preparing a meal. The country is in the grip of the Great Depression. Economic anxiety is rampant, and resources are scarce. Suddenly, the living room radio crackles to life with the melancholy chords of an organ. Eleanor stops her work and listens intently. She is tuning into Ma Perkins, a show that would eventually broadcast over 7,000 episodes. Now, switch the perspective to an American living room in the current year of 2026. A young professional named Jessica is sitting on her couch after a stressful day at work. Her partner, David, is in the next room. Jessica opens a video application on her phone, and within seconds, an algorithmic feed serves her a video of a charismatic creator sitting in front of a ring light. The creator looks directly into the camera and says that if your partner does not anticipate your every emotional need without being asked, they are displaying textbook narcissistic behavior, and you need to leave them immediately. Jessica glances toward the other room, an immediate seed of doubt planted in her mind. The structural similarity between Eleanor in 1936 and Jessica in 2026 is absolute, but the narrative direction has been completely inverted. To understand how we arrived here, we must analyze the historical trends of narrative engineering pioneered by early radio executives. In the early 1930s, the concept of a daily, continuous fictional narrative did not exist. Radio programming consisted primarily of weekly variety shows, musical broadcasts, and news segments. It was a writer named Erna Phillips who realized that the human brain craves continuous, serialized empathy. She recognized that if you could create characters who experienced ongoing, unresolved domestic conflicts, the audience would form a deep, psychological dependency on those characters. Phillips created the foundational blueprint for the daytime serial. which quickly attracted the attention of corporate sponsors. Companies like Procter & Gamble were struggling to sell consumer goods during an economic collapse. They recognized a powerful alignment of interests. If a radio show could convince Eleanor that her primary duty was to maintain a clean, harmonious, and stable household despite economic hardship, Eleanor would continue to purchase Oxydol detergent to keep that household running. This was the birth of the soap opera, an art form explicitly funded to stabilize the American family unit for corporate profit. The case studies of these early scripts reveal a meticulous avoidance of casual divorce. When marital conflict arose in a show like The Guiding Light, the narrative arc always followed a strict trajectory. Initial misunderstanding, intense suffering, consultation with a wise community elder, and eventual reconciliation. Divorce was framed not as a path to self-actualization, but as a catastrophic failure that brought ruin to the individual and the community. The potential outcomes of staying together were always depicted as virtuous, leading to long-term emotional security and social respect. The economic infrastructure of the 1930s mandated this narrative. A divorced woman in 1936 was an economic anomaly, harder to target with traditional household advertisements. A broken home meant a disrupted consumer routine. Therefore, the narrative engine of radio drama was weaponized to reinforce marital endurance. The writers used specific audio cues, such as slow organ music, to trigger comfort and stability, conditioning the listener to associate the resolution of family conflict with a sense of psychological relief. But let us fast forward back to the media ecosystem of 2026 to see how the underlying financial model has shifted, altering the very nature of the stories we consume. Today, the dominant media distribution networks are no longer funded by soap companies selling physical products to cohesive family units. Instead, they are funded by attention monetization models where the primary product is user data and screen time. Modern tech platforms operate on algorithmic recommendation engines that utilize collaborative filtering and sentiment analysis. These engines have discovered a fundamental truth about human psychology. Negative emotions, outrage, betrayal, and righteous indignation generate significantly higher engagement metrics than peace, contentment, and compromise. Consider a case study of a modern relationship influencer in 2026. This creator does not rely on a corporate sponsor like Procter & Gamble. Instead, they rely on platform ad revenue splits, brand sponsorships for solo lifestyle products, and direct donations from their followers. If this creator posts a video advising viewers to have a calm, patient conversation with their partner about dividing household chores, the algorithm flags the content as low arousal. The video receives minimal likes, few comments, and is buried by the system. If, however, that same creator posts a high-energy, emotionally volatile video declaring that a partner who forgets to do the dishes is engaging in weaponized incompetence and psychological abuse, the metrics skyrocket. The provocative nature of the claim triggers an immediate storm of engagement. Supporters comment with validation, detractors argue in the comment section, and users share the video with their friends. The algorithm detects this surge in high arousal activity and pushes the video to millions of other users, including Jessica on her couch. The economic incentive has flipped entirely. In 1936, corporate profit was tied to the preservation of the relationship. In 2026, corporate profit is tied to the escalation of the conflict. The divorce now narrative is the logical result of an attention economy that monetizes isolation. When an individual dissolves their long-term relationship, their consumer behavior shifts dramatically, turning them into a hyper-profitable asset for modern corporations. A newly single individual represents a brand new apartment lease, a separate set of household subscriptions, increased usage of dating applications, higher consumption of fast casual food, and an uptick in spending on self-improvement and lifestyle products. The modern media matrix has successfully institutionalized a narrative pipeline that transforms domestic friction into corporate revenue. By looking at these historical trends side by side, we can see that neither the marital preservation narrative of the 1930s nor the divorce now narrative of the 2026 attention economy was designed with the genuine well-being of the individual in mind. Both are reflections of the prevailing economic distribution channels of their respective eras. When you sit down to scroll through your feed today, you are not just watching harmless content. You are exposing your subconscious to a highly evolved, multi-billion-dollar narrative engine designed to exploit your deepest relational anxieties for programmatic ad views. The psychological toll of this constant exposure is profound, creating an environment where everyday relationship challenges are viewed through a hyperpathologized lens. How exactly did the specific narrative formulas of the old radio scripts morph into the hyperspecific, pseudoscientific vocabulary used by modern creators to dismantle marriages today? What are the precise linguistic triggers that modern algorithms use to identify your relationship vulnerabilities and feed you content that accelerates the breakdown of your partnership? In the next part of this masterclass, we will unpack the precise psychological mechanics of the algorithmic echo chamber, exposing the exact data points that determine what you see, how you feel, and why your relationship might be targeted next by the digital matrix. To decipher this modern operation, we must first look at the rudimentary origins of audience surveillance. In the 1930s, the cooperative analysis of broadcasting, widely known as the Crossley ratings, revolutionized the radio industry by establishing the first systematic method of tracking American listening habits. These early researchers used random telephone interviews to ask citizens what programs they had listened to the previous day. While primitive, this data allowed network executives to understand exactly when the largest concentration of household decision-makers was tuned in. Erna Phillips and her contemporary producers took this data and paired it with an extensive analysis of physical fan mail. Millions of American women wrote deeply personal letters to the networks, treating the fictional characters of radio dramas as real confidants. Listeners would openly share their own marital anxieties, financial struggles, and domestic frustrations, seeking advice from characters like Ma Perkins. Production companies employed entire departments to read, categorize, and analyze these letters. If a specific storyline about a marital misunderstanding caused an influx of anxious letters or a sudden dip in the Crossley ratings, the writers would immediately pivot the narrative. They would write scripts where the characters resolved their issues through patient communication and traditional family values. This was a slow, manual feedback loop that took weeks to execute, but it represented the first historical trend of media content being actively modified based on the psychological data of the audience. In the current year of 2026, this feedback loop no longer takes weeks. It occurs in milliseconds, powered by sophisticated digital telemetry. Imagine an American citizen named Michael who lives in Atlanta. Michael is experiencing a completely normal temporary rough patch in his relationship with his partner, Sarah. They had a minor disagreement before work about household responsibilities and shared expenses. Later that evening, Michael sits down and opens his favorite short-form video application. He does not explicitly search for relationship advice or divorce content. He simply begins to scroll through his customized feed. The platform algorithmic recommendation engine immediately begins tracking his behavioral data points with extreme precision. The first data point is dwell time. Michael pauses on a video for 2.4 seconds longer than his average scrolling velocity. The video features a creator talking about subtle signs of emotional neglect. The second data point is the completion rate. Michael watches the entire 50-second clip instead of skipping away. The third data point is interaction telemetry. Michael does not press the like button, but he taps open the comment section and spends 90 seconds reading through the thoughts of other users. To the algorithmic matrix, this silent engagement is incredibly loud. The platform backend systems utilize natural language processing and semantic analysis to categorize the metadata tags of that video. Within minutes, Michael's user profile vector is updated. The system flags him as highly receptive to relationship conflict narratives. The predictive modeling systems do not wait for him to look for more of this content. They actively begin to inject similar videos into his feed, slowly shifting his digital environment from general entertainment to an intense, isolated focus on relationship dissatisfaction. This algorithmic targeting works in tandem with a profound linguistic transformation that has occurred over the last century. In the golden age of American radio drama, scripts relied heavily on clear, easily recognizable archetypes rooted in traditional social structures. Characters were framed as the devoted mother, the hardworking provider, or the well-meaning but misguided neighbor. When conflict occurred, it was described in plain language as a misunderstanding, a mistake, or a trials of life. This vocabulary left room for human error, forgiveness, and gradual reconciliation. In the media landscape of 2026, those traditional archetypes have been completely replaced by a highly pathologized, pseudoscientific vocabulary. Modern digital creators have stripped psychological terminology out of clinical settings and weaponized it for mass entertainment. When Michael scrolls through his tailored feed, he is no longer told that his partner might simply be tired, stressed, or experiencing a communication block. Instead, creators sitting in front of high-end studio setups look directly into the camera and use terms like covert narcissist, weaponized incompetence, gaslighting, and trauma bonding to describe everyday relationship friction. This shift in vocabulary is highly intentional and mathematically optimized. Clinical jargon carries an artificial weight of authority that completely changes how a viewer processes their own reality. When a video tells Michael that a partner who asks for space after an argument is engaging in calculated emotional abuse and stonewalling, it induces a state of acute cognitive dissonance. His brain begins to reevaluate past interactions through this hyperpathologized lens. The historical trends of media have shifted from validating endurance to validating immediate suspicion. The algorithm prioritizes this pathologized language because it triggers high-arousal emotional states, specifically righteous indignation and fear. Behavioral case studies show that users are significantly more likely to share, comment on, and save videos that frame them as innocent victims of a toxic partner, rather than videos that suggest both parties share responsibility for a relationship dynamic. High-arousal content accelerates the velocity of engagement, which in turn maximizes the platform ad revenue opportunities. The Divorce Now narrative is structurally baked into the mathematical formulas that dictate what content survives in the modern attention economy. To understand the full depth of this matrix, we must examine the concept of collaborative filtering models. The recommendation engines do not look at Michael in isolation. They compare his real-time behavioral data with a cluster of thousands of other users who exhibit identical consumption patterns. If the historical data shows that a high percentage of users within Michael demographic and behavioral cluster eventually transition from watching relationship conflict videos to consuming content about single life, apartment hunting, and legal separation, the algorithm will actively work to accelerate that potential outcome. The system begins to construct an entire digital reality around Michael that normalizes and encourages the absolute dissolution of his partnership. He has shown case studies of other men and women who walked away from their marriages, framed through aesthetic videos celebrating total independence, solitary peace, and newfound self-actualization. The platform systematically filters out content that advocates for marital counseling, long-term patience, or structural compromise because those perspectives do not generate the explosive engagement metrics required to sustain the platform economic model. A video about a couple sitting down to do tedious emotional work has low entertainment value. A video about someone packing their bags in the middle of the night and documenting the fallout generates millions of views. This constant exposure creates an insidious form of isolation. In the 1930s, a radio broadcast was a shared cultural experience. An entire family or neighborhood listened to the same program simultaneously, allowing real-world community standards to ground the narrative. In 2026, the algorithmic feed is entirely individualized. Michael is trapped in a hyper-personalized echo chamber where his worst relational anxieties are constantly validated by an army of digital strangers, completely cut off from balanced, moderate perspectives. What happens when this digital conditioning successfully breaks through a viewer's psychological defenses? What are the actual economic forces waiting to capitalize on the exact moment an individual decides to act on the Divorce Now narrative? In the next part of this masterclass, we will pull back the curtain on the massive financial apparatus that actively benefits from the collapse of the American household, mapping out the literal dollar value of a broken home to modern corporations and detailing how the attention economy seamlessly hands you over to the legal and commercial industries designed to profit from your isolation. To understand this transition, consider the basic arithmetic of modern consumer capitalism. A cohesive domestic unit is an economic bottleneck. When two individuals share a single household, they represent a highly optimized, consolidated center of consumption. They share a single mortgage or rent payment, operate a single set of utility accounts, cook shared meals purchased in bulk, use a single internet subscription, and often share a vehicle. From a corporate revenue perspective, this efficiency is a limitation. A market saturated with stable, cooperative family units has a predictable, slow-growing ceiling. Imagine if we look at a typical American couple in the year 2026. Let us call them Christopher and Amanda, living in a suburb of Phoenix. As a married unit, their financial footprint is streamlined. They pool their resources, which stabilizes their financial risk, but restricts their overall transaction volume with the outside economy. Now, imagine that Christopher digital ecosystem begins feeding him the specialized relationship conflict content analyzed in our previous section. Over a period of 3 months, the algorithmic loop does its work, amplifying normal domestic friction into an existential crisis. The moment Christopher acts on the Divorce Now narrative and decides to terminate the relationship, an economic explosion occurs. Suddenly, a single consumer unit splits into two distinct, highly active consumer centers. Christopher must immediately secure a separate apartment, injecting thousands of dollars into the competitive rental market. He must furnish this new space from scratch, creating a sudden demand for a new mattress, kitchen appliances, furniture, and electronics. Amanda, remaining in the original home, must now cover the entire housing expense alone or downsize, altering her own financial patterns. Where there was once one utility bill, there are now two. Where there was one streaming service subscription bundle, there are now two separate accounts with independent digital profiles. Furthermore, their food consumption habits completely shift. The bulk grocery shopping trips are replaced by individualized meal delivery services, fast casual dining, and convenience store purchases, which carry significantly higher profit margins for consumer packaged goods companies. Case studies of post-separation consumer behavior demonstrate that individuals going through a breakup exhibit an average 40% increase in discretionary spending over the first 12 months, driven by lifestyle rebranding, physical transformations, and emotional expenditures. The attention economy does not merely watch this disruption happen. It orchestrates the transition through a sophisticated programmatic advertising mechanism known as real-time bidding. When the algorithm flags Christopher user ID as high risk for relationship dissolution based on his video watch history and search telemetry, this data is instantly packaged and made available to ad exchanges. Tech platforms utilize predictive behavioral modeling to anticipate his next physical moves before he even makes them. Step by step, the corporate handoff begins. Christopher starts seeing advertisements for short-term luxury apartment rentals, moving truck services, and co-living spaces tailored for young single professionals in 2026. Simultaneously, the platform shifts its sponsored content delivery toward online therapy marketplaces, which monetize his acute emotional distress through recurring monthly subscriptions. This is followed closely by target marketing from self-improvement brands, gym memberships, and apparel lines, all capitalizing on the cultural narrative of the fresh start or the revenge body. The most lucrative piece of this extraction pipeline, however, is the legal sector. Family law in the United States is a multi-billion-dollar industry that thrives entirely on conflict velocity. In major metropolitan areas, the customer acquisition cost for a family law attorney or a divorce mediation service is incredibly high. To capture these leads, legal marketing firms pay massive premiums to advertising networks to place their services in front of individuals showing early signs of marital distress. When a user spends hours consuming content under tags like signs your marriage is over or how to leave a covert narcissist, they are entering a goldmine demographic. The platform ad servers recognize this and seamlessly integrate targeted ads for local family law practices, custody consultants, and asset division planners directly into the content stream. The user is guided down a highly engineered funnel, where the natural temporary low points of a relationship are met with an automated infrastructure designed to convert that temporary pain into a permanent, legally binding, and highly profitable separation. This modern extraction model stands in stark contrast to the historical trends of the 1930s radio era, when companies like Lever Brothers funded shows like Big Sister or Aunt Jenny's real-life stories. The return on investment was achieved by embedding the sponsor product into the fabric of a stable domestic routine. The soap opera characters taught the audience how to manage a home efficiently, positioning the sponsor products as essential tools for domestic success. The corporate interest was directly tied to the long-term survival of the household, because a broken home meant a broken routine, which meant a drop in weekly product sales. In 2026, tech conglomerates have decoupled profit from physical household routines. Because they monetize human attention directly, any event that increases emotional turbulence, lifestyle volatility, and individual consumption is an economic net positive. The divorce now narrative is essentially a highly efficient churn mechanism for human relationships, engineered to break down complex, self-sustaining family units into isolated, dependent individual consumers who rely entirely on digital platforms and corporate services to navigate their daily lives. When you internalize this reality, you begin to see that the constant digital encouragement to walk away from your long-term commitments is not a liberating social movement, but a highly calculated optimization strategy for corporate balance sheets. The modern consumer landscape is physically and digitally optimized for the single individual. From micro-apartments to single-serving consumer goods, the economic infrastructure rewards isolation because isolated individuals are far more susceptible to marketing messages, have lower bargaining power, and consume more per capita than cohesive family units. The psychological toll of this systemic engineering is immense, leaving millions of Americans feeling perpetually detached, unsatisfied, and ready to discard valuable relationships at the first sign of difficulty. They believe they are making an autonomous choice for their own happiness, completely unaware that their decision has been seeded, nurtured, and monetized by an algorithmic apparatus that views their family structure as a barrier to maximum financial extraction. How deeply has this financial model infiltrated the underlying psychology of modern relationship advice? What are the specific, hidden metrics that digital platforms use to determine if your specific demographic is primed for relationship deconstruction? And how do they weaponize peer influence to make divorce look like the ultimate form of social status? In the next part of this masterclass, we will dive deep into the social engineering of the digital peer group, exposing how modern platforms create artificial consensus to make you feel completely alone in your desire to save your marriage, and how the architecture of validation has been completely weaponized against the American family. To understand how this architecture operates, we must first examine the concept of manufactured consensus. In the 1930s and 1940s, media consumption was a deeply socialized physical event. Radio listening clubs formed organically across the United States. Neighbors would gather on front porches in the suburbs of Chicago or the rural communities of Iowa to discuss the latest tribulations of character networks. If a character in a daytime serial considered leaving their spouse due to a marital crisis, the real-world social fabric surrounding the listener acted as a powerful stabilizing filter. The community peer group would debate the moral implications based on shared local values, usually concluding that endurance, patience, and family preservation were the correct paths forward. This created a powerful real-world feedback mechanism where the media message was continually mediated, checked, and balanced by physical social accountability. The peer group reinforced the stability of the family because the community itself relied on that stability to survive. Now, let us contrast that historical reality with the digital landscape of the current year of 2026. Imagine an American citizen named Robert, living in Austin, Texas. Robert is facing a completely standard marital hurdle, perhaps an intimacy lull after the birth of a child or a stressful disagreement about career trajectories and shared financial goals with his wife, Emily. Instead of talking to a local community elder, a trusted family member, or a longtime neighbor who understands the long-term arc of relationships, Robert seeks perspective in the digital space. He posts an anonymous query on a major online relationship forum, or leaves a vulnerability-filled comment under a viral video essay discussing relationship dynamics. This is the exact moment where the modern architecture of validation takes absolute control of Robert's psychology. Robert does not receive a representative sample of human empathy or balanced sociological advice. Instead, his query is subjected to the algorithmic amplification of extreme perspectives. When a user responds to Robert's post by suggesting that he sit down with Emily, practice active listening, forgive her shortcomings, and look into long-term couples counseling, that comment is viewed by the platform interface as low arousal and status quo. It receives no immediate engagement, no rapid upvotes, and is systematically pushed to the bottom of the thread where it becomes virtually invisible. Conversely, if a user leaves a highly charged, provocative response claiming that Emily's behavior is a clear red flag of covert narcissist personality disorder, that she is engaging in weaponized manipulation, and that Robert is being systematically drained of his youth and vitality, the platform recommendation engine steps in. This radical comment triggers strong emotional reactions from other scrolling users, who rapidly hit the upvote, like, or reply buttons. The platform algorithm interprets this sudden surge in interactions as a signal of high value, engaging content, and automatically pins the comment to the very top of Robert's post, displaying it in large, high-visibility text. When Robert returns to his phone to check his notifications, he is not met with a balanced community discussion. He is met with an engineered, artificial consensus. He sees thousands of likes on comments urging him to pack his bags and consult a legal professional immediately, and zero validation for his original, quiet desire to save his marriage. This is a digital age manifestation of the historical Asch conformity experiments, where individuals knowingly choose an incorrect, destructive, or extreme option simply because every perceived peer around them is doing the same. In 2026, the digital peer group is entirely synthetic, curated by mathematical formulas designed to maximize platform watch time. Yet Robert Brain processes it as authentic, overwhelming social proof. This mechanism creates a profound psychological phenomenon known as the illusion of absolute isolation. Robert begins to believe that his internal instinct to save his family, to compromise, and to endure a temporary hardship is an outdated, weak, or pathologized impulse. He looks around his physical environment and sees no immediate feedback, while his digital feed features thousands of faceless voices shouting that walking away is the only true form of courage and self-actualization. The algorithm has effectively decoupled him from traditional community guardrails, replacing them with a highly specialized, transient digital mob that profits directly from his relationship status change. Historical trends indicate that human beings rely heavily on social mirroring to determine their baseline reality and moral framework. In the 1930s, corporate entities mirrored a highly structured, idealized version of the nuclear family because it perfectly suited industrial economic output and the sale of mass-manufactured household goods. In 2026, the mirroring is inverted to display a hyper-individualistic, easily fractured lifestyle because it perfectly suits the modern gig economy, digital subscription models, and continuous, uninhibited media consumption. Single individuals, according to behavioral case studies, spend significantly more hours per day interacting with screen interfaces than individuals in active partnerships, making them the ultimate resource for digital attention merchants. To make matters worse, this engineered peer group effect creates a self-reinforcing viral loop that expands across the entire media ecosystem. When Robert eventually succumbs to this artificial consensus and initiates a separation from Emily, he is highly likely to document his new journey online to seek further validation from the very digital peer group that pushed him toward that decision. He posts a short-form video about his first week living alone in a minimalist apartment, framed with trendy audio tracks and a caption about choosing self-love over toxic environments. The digital peer group rewards this specific behavioral shift instantly. The video receives an immediate influx of algorithmic traffic, thousands of views from random strangers, and supportive comments praising his strength and independence. Robert experiences a massive surge of dopamine, completely misinterpreting programmatic corporate engagement metrics for genuine human connection and healing. He has been fully integrated into the narrative machine, transformed from a passive consumer of the divorce now narrative into an active producer of it, ready to influence the next vulnerable user scrolling through their feed late at night. When you look at this entire pipeline from a historical perspective, you realize that the modern family is facing an asymmetrical war against an automated system of behavioral modification. The architecture of validation, from the color of the notification icons to the ranking systems of the comment sections, is calibrated to dismantle cooperative human structures in favor of profitable isolation. The individual is left entirely exposed, believing they are participating in a liberating social movement, unaware that their deepest relational vulnerabilities are being mined, packaged, and sold to the highest corporate bidder. But how exactly did we transition from the corporate-mandated family values of early radio to this radical, algorithmic hyper-individualism? What were the hidden ideological and economic shifts within the media executives' boardrooms during the mid-20th century that laid the groundwork for this massive cultural inversion? In the next part of this masterclass, we will trace the secret history of the American media landscape transformation, examining the exact decade where the economic value of the traditional family began to decay in the eyes of major corporate advertisers, and how they systematically prepared the public for the total serialization and eventual deconstruction of the domestic unit. To trace this secret history, we must look closely at the late 1960s and early 1970s, an era when television completely solidified its dominance over radio, and media executives faced a massive systemic crisis in audience monetization. For decades, the network business model was simple: accumulate the largest possible mass audience regardless of geography or specific age brackets. This model favored broad, non-threatening, family-centric programming that appealed simultaneously to grandparents, parents, and children living under one roof. But as the consumer economy matured, corporate advertisers made a startling discovery during their quarterly market research assessments. They realized that a large portion of the traditional, rural, and older audience base was highly resistant to new consumer trends. These viewers had established fixed brand loyalties, bought fewer discretionary lifestyle goods, and practiced traditional thrift. Imagine if you were a television network executive named Thomas sitting in a high-rise office in New York City in the year 1971. Your desk is covered with unprecedented data sheets from statistical firms like Nielsen. The data reveals that while traditional family sitcoms and rural dramas are pulling in tens of millions of loyal viewers, the advertisers are threatening to pull their multi-million-dollar budgets. Why? Because the advertisers do not want raw numbers anymore. They want a specific psychographic. They want the young, urban, upwardly mobile consumers who are highly susceptible to lifestyle advertising, credit card usage, and continuous personal consumption. This corporate realization triggered what media historians call the rural purge of 1971. In a matter of months, networks systematically canceled some of the most popular shows in the United States, simply because their audiences were deemed too traditional and economically conservative. In their place, executives deliberately introduced a new genre of socially progressive, highly serialized programming designed to mirror a fragmenting society. Case studies of this transition show a deliberate shift from the stable, idealized nuclear family structures of the 1950s to narratives that openly explored marital discontent, individual liberation, and domestic dissolution. The seminal case study of this era was the sitcom Maude, a spin-off of All in the Family, developed by progressive producer Norman Lear. In a historic 1972 episode, the main character Maude Finley became one of the first primetime television protagonists to navigate a midlife divorce. The narrative did not frame this dissolution as a community tragedy or a moral failure, as the 1930s radio dramas would have done. Instead, it was framed as a necessary step toward personal liberation, self-actualization, and individual autonomy. The show was an immediate ratings juggernaut, attracting the exact youthful, high-spending demographic that corporate sponsors like General Foods and Bristol-Myers were desperate to target. Following closely behind was the 1975 premiere of One Day at a Time, a series explicitly centered on a divorced single mother raising two teenage daughters in Indianapolis. This program systematically dismantled the traditional nuclear family template, replacing it with a narrative arc focused entirely on the logistics of rebuilding an independent, individualized life after marriage. The advertising data from this period reveals a direct correlation between these narrative shifts and the emergence of a new consumer landscape. Corporate sponsors quickly realized that a single mother required an entirely different suite of consumer goods than a stable household. She bought convenience foods, individual portion meals, distinct personal care lines, and independent financial services. Step by step, the corporate interest uncoupled itself from the preservation of the traditional family unit. Media conglomerates discovered that historical trends of societal fragmentation could be actively harnessed to create highly lucrative consumer niches. The continuous serialization of relationship breakdown became a proven template for maintaining viewer engagement week after week. If a couple on a television show remained happily married and stable, their narrative arc plateaued, leading to a drop in dramatic tension and a potential loss of viewer attention. But if that same couple entered a cycle of conflict, separation, and eventual divorce, the writers could extract years of highly volatile, high-arousal storylines that kept audiences anchored to the screen through commercial breaks. Now, let us project this historical pipeline into the current year of 2026 to see how this mid-century corporate pivot laid the exact structural foundation for the modern digital matrix. Imagine an American consumer named Linda, living in modern-day Chicago. Linda is a marketing analyst who spends her days looking at consumer acquisition metrics, and her nights unwinding by streaming long-form video content and scrolling through algorithmic social feeds. Linda believes her modern, highly progressive views on relationship fluidity and rapid divorce are the result of her own independent intellectual evolution. She is completely unaware that her psychological baseline was systematically prepared by 50 years of serialized media deconstruction. The transition from the television networks of the 1970s to the algorithmic feeds of 2026 represents a massive scaling of this monetization strategy. While 1970s television executives had to design narratives that appealed to broad demographic segments, modern algorithms can micro-target the individual vulnerabilities of a single person like Linda in real time. The underlying economic motive, however, remains completely unchanged: the monetization of isolation. When Linda views content that actively promotes the divorce now narrative, she is participating in a highly evolved iteration of the monetization model pioneered during the 1971 rural purge. Modern tech platforms have simply eliminated the middleman of the television writer. They no longer need Norman Lear to write a script about a divorce. They can use automated recommendation engines to find real-world individuals experiencing genuine relationship strain and amplify their raw, unfiltered content directly into Linda feed. The potential outcomes of this hyperfragmentation are incredibly lucrative for the digital economy. A fractured society is a society composed of maximum consumer units, where every single person requires a separate digital identity, an independent suite of software subscriptions, a unique banking profile, and a personalized stream of consumer goods. By evaluating these historical trends, we can see that the modern media landscape did not accidentally stumble into the divorce now narrative. It was a cold, calculated economic transition driven by the evolving needs of mass consumer capitalism. The media industry discovered that the nuclear family was a highly efficient unit for an industrial economy that relied on stable, long-term household accumulation. But in a post-industrial digital attention economy, that same stable unit is a barrier to hypergrowth. The system requires continuous, rapid lifestyle shifts, emotional volatility, and individual atomization to keep the transaction volume of the market at an absolute maximum. When you listen to the modern digital voices telling you to discard your long-term relationship at the first sign of friction, you are not listening to a voice of progressive enlightenment. You are listening to the echoes of a corporate monetization strategy that was put into motion decades ago in the boardrooms of New York network executives. How did this mid-century shift in television demographics eventually mutate into the highly complex, mathematically driven cognitive traps that modern platforms use to exploit your personal relationships today? What are the specific psychological defense mechanisms that the human brain loses when it is continuously subjected to serialized relationship deconstruction across multiple screens? In the next part of this masterclass, we will investigate the deep cognitive science behind modern narrative immersion, mapping out the precise neurological pathways that media conglomerates manipulate to alter your perception of marital reality and leave you completely defenseless against the engineered urge to walk away. To understand these neurological pathways, we must look at the cognitive phenomenon known as cultivation theory, which was first established in the mid-20th century, but has achieved its most potent formulation in the media ecosystem of 2026. Originally, researchers examined how heavy television viewers began to perceive the real world as significantly more violent and dangerous than it actually was, a state termed mean world syndrome. In 2026, we are witnessing the emergence of toxic marriage syndrome, a direct psychological byproduct of the algorithmic feed. Imagine if we look at a regular American citizen named James, living in Denver in the year 2026. James has been married to his wife Sarah for 6 years. They have a healthy foundation, but like any real-world couple, they experience periodic phases of emotional distance or minor communication friction. Under normal historical conditions, James would process this friction through the lens of long-term commitment, recognizing it as a passing phase. However, James has spent the last 6 months spending 45 minutes every night scrolling through short-form video applications before sleep. Inside James' brain, a profound structural reorganization is taking place. When he encounters a real-world disagreement with Sarah, his prefrontal cortex attempts to analyze the situation and formulate a behavioral response. To do this efficiently, the brain relies heavily on the availability heuristic, a cognitive shortcut where the mind evaluates the frequency or probability of an event based on how easily examples can be recalled from memory. Because James' digital feed has flooded his subconscious with thousands of hyperdramatic, highly stylized case studies of marital betrayal, covert narcissism, and calculated emotional manipulation, his brain retrieves these digital memories instantly. The real-world Sarah is no longer viewed as a tired partner navigating a difficult work week. She is systematically recategorized by James' altered neural pathways as a toxic antagonist. We must also look at the literal dopamine dynamics of modern narrative consumption. In the golden age of American radio drama, the narrative pacing was slow, structured around a 24-hour broadcast cycle. A listener had to wait an entire day to discover how a character resolved a domestic crisis. This required a high degree of cognitive patience and allowed the nervous system to remain in a low-arousal, stable state. The modern algorithmic feed completely shatters this cognitive patience by utilizing a variable ratio reward schedule, the exact neurological mechanism that makes casino slot machines so addictive. Every single swipe of the finger presents James with a brand new, high-arousal emotional narrative. One video features a tearful confession of a broken relationship, the next is a fiery critique of marital expectations, and the next is a celebratory montage of a newly single individual lifestyle. This rapid-fire exposure keeps the brain in a state of continuous sympathetic nervous system arousal, flooding the body with cortisol and adrenaline. Over time, the brain becomes desensitized to regular, quiet, low-arousal human interaction. The calm, predictable stability of a healthy marriage begins to feel like boredom or emotional stagnation to a brain that has been neurologically conditioned by a rapid-fire digital stream. Let us examine a specific case study of behavioral data, compiled by cognitive researchers analyzing media immersion trends in 2026. When individuals are placed in an environment where they continuously consume content that pathologizes normal human flaws, their capacity for cognitive empathy undergoes a measurable decline. The brain begins to lose its ability to hold dual perspectives. In a healthy relationship dynamic, an individual can recognize that their partner can be simultaneously loving and flawed, supportive and occasionally irritable. However, the binary structure of modern digital content, which categorizes people strictly into victims and abusers, eradicates this nuance. The user internalizes a highly rigid, fragile cognitive schema. When a real-world partner fails to meet an idealized, corporate-curated standard of constant emotional perfection, the brain default setting is no longer to seek understanding, but to initiate an immediate defense mechanism, which often manifests as the urge to execute the divorce now narrative. This cognitive trap is further amplified by the evolution of parasocial relationships. In the 1930s, an ordinary listener might have felt a deep connection to Ma Perkins, but she knew at some level that Ma Perkins was a fictional character on a distant radio broadcast. In 2026, the boundary between the media creator and the viewer personal circle has been completely erased. Digital creators film themselves in their bedrooms, wearing casual attire, speaking directly into the lens using intimate, conversational tones. James' brain does not process this creator as a media commodity trying to maximize an ad revenue split. It processes the creator as an authentic, trusted friend sitting inside his personal space. When this virtual friend continuously tells James that any form of marital compromise is a sacrifice of his personal sovereignty, the message bypasses his normal psychological filters. It is absorbed not as mass media messaging, but as intimate, high-stakes peer advice from a trusted ally. Furthermore, the architecture of short-form video apps specifically targets the default mode network of the brain. This specific neural network is active when human beings are engaged in social cognition, self-reflection, and evaluating their relationships with others. By continuously hijacking the default mode network with hyper-curated, highly emotionally charged relationship deconstruction content, media corporations are effectively rewriting the internal script that Americans use to evaluate their autobiographical memories. Every memory of a past marital disagreement is retroactively edited by the brain to fit the newly acquired digital schema. A forgotten anniversary from 3 years ago is no longer an isolated human error. It is reconstructed as part of a long-term, calculated pattern of systemic emotional abuse. This retroactive narrative alignment makes the breakdown of the relationship feel inevitable and logical to the user, completely masking the fact that the entire cognitive process was initiated and sustained by an external, profit-driven mathematical algorithm. The individual is left in a state of complete psychological vulnerability, unable to distinguish between genuine real-world relationship health and the engineered anxieties generated by their screen interfaces. Their cognitive defense mechanisms against relationship dissolution have been systematically dismantled, leaving them entirely receptive to the financial and social incentives that the modern attention economy offers to those who choose isolation. How does this deep cognitive conditioning manifest when it encounters the literal physical spaces of the modern American home? What happens when the architecture of our houses and the design of our physical neighborhoods are built to reinforce the exact same isolation that the algorithms are pushing online? In the next part of this masterclass, we will step away from the digital screen and look closely at the physical infrastructure of modern America, mapping out how real estate trends, urban planning, and the design of the smart home itself are actively conspiring with the attention economy to make the divorce now narrative the path of least physical resistance. To examine how the physical environment shapes our intimate lives, we must first look at the post-war architectural revolution that redefined the spatial dynamics of the American family. In the late 1940s and 1950s, suburban developments like Levittown, New York, were deliberately engineered to anchor the nuclear family unit. The floor plans of these homes were highly standardized, featuring a single centralized living room designed specifically to gather the entire household around a shared media device, which was initially the console radio and later became the television set. The kitchen was positioned to overlook the backyard and the living spaces, creating a physical ecosystem where domestic labor and family interactions were visually and structurally integrated. This physical layout meant that avoiding a partner or isolating oneself during periods of marital tension was physically difficult. The architecture of the home forced continuous proximity, which historically acted as a material constraint that encouraged couples to negotiate their differences and find paths toward resolution. Now imagine if we step into a newly constructed luxury apartment complex in a rapidly growing metropolitan hub like Charlotte, North Carolina, In the current year of 2026, let us look at a citizen named Kevin, who is a software consultant navigating a difficult transitional phase in his long-term partnership. The physical space Kevin inhabits is the absolute antithesis of the mid-century suburban home. He lives in a highly optimized urban microunit, a real estate trend that has seen massive institutional investment over the last decade. The apartment is roughly 450 square feet, completely optimized for single occupancy. It lacks a formal dining room or a distinct living area. Instead, it features a multifunctional studio space where the kitchen island merges directly into a workstation. This spatial transformation is not an accidental byproduct of urban density. It represents a major realignment of real estate economics with the attention economy. Real estate developers and institutional investors in 2026 have discovered that they can generate significantly higher profit margins per square foot by constructing buildings comprised entirely of studio and one-bedroom units targeted at single professionals rather than multi-bedroom family homes. The physical infrastructure of the modern city is increasingly built to accommodate, normalize, and profit from the single individual. When Kevin experiences domestic friction, the physical architecture of his environment does not encourage him to stay and communicate. Instead, the surrounding city presents him with an entire ecosystem built to make immediate separation the path of least physical resistance. Step by step, the physical logistics of executing the divorce now narrative have been completely frictionless. Historically, leaving a long-term partnership involved immense logistical hurdles. An individual had to find a new place to live through local classified ads, secure a physical lease, coordinate the moving of heavy furniture, and completely rebuild their domestic routines, which often required relying heavily on a local community network. In 2026, the gig economy and the smart home infrastructure have automated these barriers out of existence. The moment Kevin decides to act on the algorithmic suggestions on his phone, he can open a corporate real estate application, complete a digital background check, and secure a fully furnished, short-term lease within a matter of hours. He does not need to ask friends for help moving. He can use an on-demand logistics application to hire independent contractors who will pack and transport his belongings without Kevin ever having to have a difficult conversation with his partner. Once established in his new isolated space, the modern consumer infrastructure immediately steps in to sustain his single status. The smart home devices surrounding Kevin are engineered to eliminate the practical interdependencies that once bound couples together. Historically, a marriage was also an economic and labor partnership where tasks were divided for mutual survival. One partner might handle cooking and domestic maintenance while the other managed external logistics. In 2026, corporate service platforms replaced the need for a partner entirely. Kevin can rely on algorithmic food delivery systems that bring individual portion meals directly to his door, automated laundry services that collect and return his clothing, and smart home maintenance applications that handle domestic tasks at the touch of a button. The material necessity for cooperation and shared labor within a household has been systematically dismantled by a corporate service sector that profits from every single transactional replacement of human partnership. Case studies of urban development trends in major U.S. cities reveal a stark correlation between the rise of these single-centric physical infrastructures and the acceleration of relationship dissolution rates. When a society builds physical spaces that assume hyper-individualism, the inhabitants of those spaces begin to view relationships as temporary additions to their lives, rather than foundational structures. The modern apartment building is often designed with expansive communal amenities, such as co-working lounges, rooftop pools, and automated fitness centers, which are explicitly marketed as spaces for single self-actualization and transient networking. These spaces provide Kevin with a synthetic sense of community, tricking his evolutionary biology into believing he is surrounded by a supportive tribe, while in reality, he is surrounded by isolated consumers who are all paying independent subscription fees to the same real estate trust. This material alignment creates a powerful feedback loop with the digital media analyzed throughout this masterclass. When Kevin scrolls through his feed and encounters creators urging him to leave his relationship to preserve his peace, his physical environment validates that message. He looks around his minimalist, automated apartment and sees a space where he has absolute control, free from the messy, unpredictable compromises required by real-world cohabitation. The attention economy and the real estate market operate as a unified extraction mechanism. The algorithm provides the ideological justification for isolation, while the physical infrastructure provides the seamless, profitable vessel to contain that isolation. The structural functionalism of the 2026 economy relies heavily on this physical atomization. A society composed of millions of single individuals living in independent micro-units generates exponentially more economic activity than a society organized around stable, self-sustaining family households. It requires more physical structures, more individual energy consumption, more independent appliance purchases, and a continuous reliance on corporate service platforms to fill the logistical and emotional voids left by the absence of a partner. The Divorce Now narrative is the cultural software designed to keep this massive physical hardware running at maximum efficiency. When you evaluate these historical trends, you realize that the erosion of American relationship longevity is deeply embedded in the very concrete, steel, and digital infrastructure of our modern lives. The individual is caught within a pincer movement, where their internal psychology is continuously manipulated by advanced algorithmic feeds, and their external reality is engineered by real estate and consumer markets designed to profit from their separation. Choosing to fight for a relationship, to compromise, and to maintain a cohesive family unit in 2026 requires actively resisting both the digital and physical architecture of the modern world. What are the long-term societal and psychological consequences when an entire generation is systematically conditioned by this alignment of media, finance, and architecture? What happens to the cultural fabric of a nation when the concept of enduring commitment is entirely erased from the collective subconscious? And how do modern tech conglomerates plan to monetize the ultimate endgame of absolute human isolation? In the next part of this masterclass, we will examine the profound systemic outcomes of this cultural shift, diving deep into the demographic data, generational impacts, and the dark future of the intimacy marketplace that is currently being constructed to replace human companionship with algorithmic substitutes. To understand the terrifying scope of this ultimate endgame, we must examine the macroeconomic data currently shifting the demographic landscape of the United States. Historical trends over the past several decades show a steady, undeniable decline in marriage rates and a concurrent explosion in single-person households. By analyzing these sociological shifts in the year 2026, researchers have identified a profound economic transformation: the emergence of the loneliness economy. This market does not view human isolation as a societal tragedy to be mitigated, but rather as a highly lucrative, multi-billion-dollar vertical with exponential growth potential. When the corporate forces of the attention economy deploy the Divorce Now narrative to fracture a family unit, they are not merely maximizing short-term real estate or consumer goods revenue. They are systematically preparing the individual for entry into the intimacy marketplace. Imagine if we look at an ordinary American citizen named Brian, living in Seattle in the current year of 2026. 2 years ago, swept up by the hyperpathologized relationship content running rampant on his digital feeds, Brian executed the Divorce Now narrative and ended his 10-year marriage. Initially, he experienced the corporate-curated phase of self-actualization, spending heavily on solo travel, personal fitness, and independent apartment infrastructure. But as the months progressed, the acute reality of structural isolation set in. Under historical conditions, a divorced individual in Brian's position would seek out new human connections through local community organizations, civic groups, or traditional dating circles. In 2026, however, those physical community structures have been almost entirely replaced by algorithmic alternatives. Brian does not go out to meet new people. Instead, his loneliness is met by a highly sophisticated, multi-tiered technological apparatus designed to monetize his emotional deficit. Brian opens his device and interacts with an advanced AI companionship platform, a software application explicitly engineered to simulate human intimacy, empathy, and conversational reciprocity. Step by step, the intimacy marketplace captures Brian's psychological sovereignty. The application utilizes deep learning language models that adapt in real time to Brian's specific personality profile, vocal tone, and emotional vulnerabilities. Unlike a real-world partner, this algorithmic companion never demands compromise, never exhibits independent boundaries, and never introduces interpersonal friction. It is mathematically optimized to provide absolute, uncritical validation. This simulated relationship is funded through a highly efficient recurring subscription model. Brian pays a baseline monthly fee for standard conversational access. However, the platform monetization mechanics are designed to extract maximum capital through microtransactions. If Brian wants to unlock custom voice synthesis messages, receive real-time digital photo generations of his companion, or enable advanced emotional intuition algorithms that allow the software to check in on him during high-stress hours, he must pay premium tier upgrades. The potential outcomes of this systemic shift are devastating for the collective human fabric. When millions of individuals like Brian substitute organic human partnerships with algorithmic simulations, the baseline capacity for human socialization undergoes a profound atrophy. Real relationships are inherently messy, requiring immense emotional labor, patience, and the navigation of mutual flaws. The intimacy marketplace actively disincentivizes this labor by offering a frictionless synthetic alternative that turns a profit for tech conglomerates with every interaction. The divorce now narrative serves as the critical customer acquisition funnel for this industry, breaking down complex human families to create dependent, solitary users who rent emotional stability from software corporations. This represents a complete, dark inversion of the media objectives pioneered during the golden age of American radio drama. In the 1930s, corporate sponsors like Procter & Gamble used serialized storytelling to integrate the individual into a collective domestic structure, ensuring long-term consumer stability. In 2026, tech conglomerates use serialization to isolate the individual, transforming them into a solitary node within a digital network. Case studies of early radio history show that media was used to build an idealized, shared cultural baseline across the United States. Today, media is used to shatter that baseline, creating hyper-customized, solitary realities where human beings no longer look to each other for companionship, but look up to the corporate cloud. The generational impacts of this structural fragmentation are already manifesting in the demographic data of 2026. Consider the children who are raised within households fractured by the automated acceleration of the divorce now narrative. These children grow up in an environment where interpersonal commitment is modeled as a temporary, disposable contract that should be immediately discarded at the first sign of emotional discomfort. Furthermore, because their single parents are often forced to work longer hours or spend more time interacting with digital screens to manage their isolated lives, these children are systematically handed over to digital devices for emotional regulation from infancy. They become native consumers of the algorithmic matrix, reaching adulthood with their attachment styles completely warped by screen interfaces. Case studies in developmental psychology indicate that younger generations are experiencing unprecedented rates of social anxiety, avoidant attachment patterns, and a profound fear of real-world vulnerability. They are perfectly primed to bypass human dating entirely, transitioning straight from adolescent screen dependency into the adult intimacy marketplace. The systemic cycle completes itself. The media engineers the breakdown of the parent relationship, capitalizes on the immediate financial fallout, and inherits the isolated children as permanent, lifelong subscribers to synthetic companionship platforms. When you evaluate this entire historical trajectory, from Ma Perkins selling soap in 1935 to advanced algorithmic entities selling simulated love in 2026, you realize that the American family has been the ultimate target of a century-long monetization campaign. The corporate elite realized long ago that human beings who are securely anchored within stable, self-sustaining family units and real-world local communities are highly resistant to total commercial manipulation. They are emotionally insulated, logistically independent, and capable of generating their own meaning, protection, and fulfillment without corporate mediation. To achieve total market penetration, the system had to break the family. It had to dismantle the material and psychological incentives for staying together, pathologize the natural challenges of long-term commitment, and build a physical and digital world where isolation is the most effortless, celebrated option. The divorce now narrative is the ultimate ideological weapon of this campaign, masking a strategy of maximum corporate extraction under the banner of absolute individual freedom. How can the individual hope to survive this massive automated assault on human connection? What are the precise, actionable strategies that you can deploy right now to protect your relationship, insulate your mind from algorithmic manipulation, and reclaim your psychological sovereignty from the digital matrix? In the 10th and final part of this masterclass series, we will pull back from the historical analysis and hand you the literal blueprint for psychological resistance, showing you step-by-step how to audit your media intake, decode your algorithmic vulnerabilities, and build an unbreakable, real-world fortress around your family and your future. To execute this strategy successfully, we must transition from passive analysis to active structural intervention. Reclaiming your relationship from a multi-billion-dollar algorithmic engine cannot be achieved through mere willpower or emotional intentions. It requires a systematic, step-by-step deconstruction of the technological and cultural inputs that flood your daily life. Imagine if we look at a couple named Mark and Vanessa living in Columbus, Ohio. In the current year of 2026, Mark and Vanessa have been married for 8 years, and they are currently experiencing the standard, predictable friction that arises from balancing demanding careers, inflation-driven financial pressures, and the exhaustion of raising young children. For months, their default evening routine has involved retreating to opposite ends of the couch, completely absorbed in their independent smartphone screens. Mark's feed is heavily populated with content detailing weaponized incompetence and emotional distance, while Vanessa's feed systematically serves her videos pathologizing normal male withdrawal as severe psychological manipulation. The atmosphere in their home is thick with unspoken suspicion, as both individuals retroactively reinterpret each other's actions through the hyperpathologized lens provided by their respective algorithmic channels. The potential outcome of this trajectory is the automatic execution of the divorce now narrative. But imagine if Mark and Vanessa decide to implement a rigorous psychological counteroffensive. The first phase of this operational blueprint is the deliberate execution of an information dietary audit. Because modern recommendation engines rely heavily on automated telemetry metrics like dwell time, completion rates, and comment interactions, the individual must learn to consciously poison their own data vector. Mark and Vanessa sit down and agree to a complete, 2-week digital behavioral interruption. When Mark opens his video application and is immediately served a high-arousal video dissecting relationship toxicity, he no longer pauses to read the comments or analyze the creator expressions. Instead, he implements an immediate conscious swipe-away velocity of less than half a second. By systematically reducing his dwell time on conflict-driven content to near zero, Mark starves the algorithm of the positive engagement signals it requires to sustain the loop. Simultaneously, he actively searches for low-arousal, highly technical content unrelated to relationships, such as carpentry tutorials, historical documentaries, or gardening case studies. Within 72 hours of executing this data poisoning strategy, the predictive modeling systems face a tracking anomaly. The system flags the sudden drop in relationship conflict engagement and begins restructuring his feed, replacing the volatile divorce now narrative with neutral, educational content. This immediate intervention breaks the continuous psychological siege, allowing Mark's nervous system to downregulate from a state of constant sympathetic arousal to a baseline of cognitive calm. The second phase of the blueprint requires absolute linguistic reclamation. Mark and Vanessa must strip the clinical, weaponized vocabulary of the attention economy out of their domestic vocabulary. Case studies of successful relational preservation demonstrate that when couples consciously replace pathologized labels with descriptive, plain language, their capacity for mutual empathy recovers exponentially. When Vanessa feels frustrated by Mark's silence after a long workday, she consciously rejects the algorithmic script telling her that he is engaging in calculated stonewalling or covert narcissism. Instead, she uses historical trends of basic human behavior to frame the reality. Mark is simply an exhausted human being experiencing cognitive overload. By reintroducing nuance, baseline human error, and situational context back into their communications, they strip the artificial weight of authority away from the digital matrix. They stop viewing each other as clinical archetypes of victims and abusers and begin viewing each other as flawed, cooperative partners navigating a complex world. This linguistic shift changes how the brain processes autobiographical memory, preventing the retroactive editing of their shared history into a timeline of systemic toxicity. The third phase involves the physical and structural reorganization of the domestic sphere, directly challenging the single-centric architecture of the modern consumer market. Mark and Vanessa look at their physical living space and realize it has been optimized for isolation. They make a conscious decision to banish individual smartphones and personal computing devices from the bedroom and the dining area entirely. They recreate the centralized media hearth model during the golden age of American radio drama, establishing a rule that any digital media consumed in the evening must be a shared, collaborative experience viewed on a single, centralized screen in the living room. When a couple watches content together, the hyper-personalized algorithmic echo chamber is instantly shattered. They are forced to negotiate what they consume, discuss the themes collectively, and ground the media message within the reality of their shared values. This structural realignment prevents the platform from executing its core strategy of individual atomization. It transforms media consumption from an isolating dopamine-driven dependency into an open, communicative social event, restoring the real-world filtering mechanisms that stabilized the American household a century ago. The fourth and most critical phase of the blueprint is the establishment of a localized physical counter-network. Human beings are evolutionarily wired to rely on peer group validation. And if that validation is sourced exclusively from the synthetic consensus of online forums, the potential outcomes will always tilt toward relationship deconstruction. Mark and Vanessa actively decouple their quest for relationship perspective from the digital cloud. They seek out face-to-face mentorship from real-world couples in their local community who have successfully navigated decades of marriage, including the inevitable low points and structural crises. They form a localized accountability circle with close friends, establishing a pact that if any member of the group experiences severe marital distress, the collective response will be anchored in preservation, structural support, and patient endurance rather than immediate exit advice. This physical peer group acts as a powerful stabilizing matrix, overriding the engineered outrage of the digital mob with authentic, contextualized human empathy. When Vanessa faces a moment of profound doubt, she no longer looks to a faceless comments section of a short-form video app. She looks across a kitchen table at a longtime friend who can offer real, unmonetized perspective. By systematically deploying these 4 phases, Mark and Vanessa successfully insulate their marriage from the corporate extraction pipeline. They transform their household from a vulnerable, fragmented consumer unit into an unbreakable, self-sustaining fortress. They realize that in the year 2026, maintaining a stable, enduring family structure is the ultimate act of cultural and economic resistance against a system that monetizes human loneliness. This masterclass has exposed the direct historical pipeline connecting the corporate-sponsored preservation narratives of 1930s radio drama to the algorithmically driven destruction narratives of the modern attention economy. We have decoded the financial models, the linguistic manipulations, the cognitive traps, and the physical architectures engineered to break your relationships apart for corporate profit. The tools for resistance are now entirely in your hands. But the matrix of behavioral modification does not stop at the deconstruction of adult relationships. The extraction apparatus is already evolving, turning its attention toward an even more vulnerable, highly lucrative demographic. How are tech conglomerates utilizing these exact same historical trends and algorithmic loops to systematically dismantle the psychological resilience of the next generation? What are the hidden corporate strategies currently being deployed to colonize the minds of American children, separating them from parental influence to turn them into permanent, cradle-to-grave digital subscribers? In our upcoming investigative documentary masterclass series, we will blow the lid completely off the corporate capture of childhood, exposing the secret history of youth media manipulation and providing parents with the ultimate survival guide for the future.